Hi everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to this postmortem of my Blitz game number 979. I started off with d4. My opponent went g6. So this got classified as the modern defense by Lichess, and I guess that's right. Normally, the modern defense is played against e4. So if I were to play e4 right now, it would transpose into a main line of the modern defense, because after e4, g6, d4 is the main move. But I was wanting to stay in queen's pawn openings. That's why I started with d4. So I played c4, and I still wasn't sure what black was going to do. He could have continued and gotten the king's Indian setup by putting the knight there, the bishop here. The pawn there, the bishop there, and the knight there. That would be a typical king's Indian setup. But he never played knight to f6, so I guess that's why it stayed in the category of modern rather than being called a king's Indian like I did during the game. Let's see, he went bishop g7, I went knight c3, I went d6. So yeah, this is the same pawn structure you get in the king's Indian defense, but the knight comes out to f6 in the king's Indian. So here I could play e4 or knight f3. I went with g3 because I was still thinking black was going for a king's Indian setup, and I wanted to play a fianchetto against it. I actually have another opportunity to play knight f3. I was a little bit mistaken during the game. But knight f3 also makes sense right here, even if I don't want to play e4. He goes e5. I have a few more options here I can take, or I can play e4 at this point to stop the pawns from coming forward. In the game, let's see, I went g3. He went e5 right away. And then, yeah, here, I still have another chance to play knight f3. I was thinking I play knight f3 and he pushes that pawn forward to harass it. But of course, that's nonsense because I just take that pawn off. Once again, it's because black hasn't played knight f6, so it's a little different than the positions I'm used to. So just some faulty thinking on my part. So I could have gone ahead and played knight f3 right here. But I took the pawn since I didn't realize that was possible. And he took back with the bishop. So just from the computer's point of view, this is still a fine move, actually. So the opening book classifies it as a mistake, but this seems to lead to a decent result for black. For white. It leaves black with some difficult choices. If he takes with the pawn, as is the line given there in the opening book, I take his queen. And, I can develop in various ways from here, but this is just a good position. I'm better developed, and am I better developed? Well, after bishop g2, black will have to be careful how he develops the the queen side. When the king moves away, there's also the idea of the knight coming here and taking the c-pawn and catching the rook in the corner. So yeah, I think I get quicker development from this point forward. So I think white is pretty comfortable, and white can still castle and black can't. So I think that is all fine for white. And so he played with the bishop, back with the bishop, which the chess engine approves of, and we're out of the opening book. But and white still has an advantage because I gained a tempo on the bishop. I develop, and he doesn't want to give up his bishop, so he retreats. So at this point, I really do have a lead in development, and I keep a comfortable edge going through the opening. I'm going to go through some parts of this game kind of quick because it was a long game, as you saw. Queen d2, and then he went bishop e6 here. I was a little bit worried about knight f5. The chess engine didn't think there was anything to be worried about. I did realize I could play bishop g5, kicks it, and then maybe drop back to f4, and then it thinks black could continue with knight e5 as he played in the game, and it thinks this is still good for white, but black is still in the game as well. It's not like an overwhelming advantage to white. It's just that white has a pleasant position coming out of the opening. He went bishop e6. This was also the top choice. Yeah, actually, the engine preferred bishop e6 to knight f5, so I think that was the top choice in the database. And then I played b3, which is okay. I could have considered moving the knight, but this seems to be all right as well. But knight to d5 was definitely an option there instead of b3. Let's see, and now he went knight to e5, which is a mistake. It actually allows me to win a pawn. I didn't manage to win it, but I should have been able to win a pawn there. So What black can do at this point to still have a decent position out of the opening is to play d5. It's a very interesting move because my inclination would be to take it, but I can't take back with the pawn, with the knight because of the pin along this diagonal. So he gets a strong piece when he takes back, and he's putting pressure on my knight, and he takes back with the knight, he's hitting my bishop. So I actually can't take that pawn. I have to find some other move, maybe unpinning the knight, and then he can take and kind of mess up my pawns on the queen side, and then that position seems to be about equal. So, well, I think the chess engine still preferred white, but certainly quite playable for black, and that's the way for black. Best play for black there, and get a decent position. Instead of that, he went knight e5, and yeah, I could have just won a pawn here. The simplest way is just to take that knight immediately, and however he takes back, he's left b7 hanging. And I've already moved this pawn to b3. Sometimes, you know, it's not really worth the pawn because black plays rook b8, your bishop retreats, and he grabs a pawn down here on b2. But I've already secured the b pawn, so I could safely just grab that pawn. I have a couple chances to do that, but I was intent on getting in this bishop h6 move, getting rid of his strong bishop. So this is not otherwise a bad move. It's just that I had better. Let's see. So now he went knight f5 and forced me to take. He took back. Oh, he took back with the knight. Interesting. Seems to be okay, I guess. And then I still have the possibility to take off this knight, trade queens. I guess I didn't want to trade queens, but I can still do that, and then grab the pawn here and be a pawn up. So once again, I should have just taken the pawn. Anyway, let's see. Knight f5. He takes. I take. He takes, and then I played knight to d4, just activating my knight and attacking his bishop. And I noticed I was attacking the pawn as well, but after he played c6 defending it, I wasn't even sure I actually wanted to take that bishop. That bishop is not such an attractive looking piece. It's not like black has the bishop pair. That's just one bishop, and it doesn't have a whole lot of scope. So yeah, my incentive for trading it off kind of vanished at this point. And I started to focus, well, since he played c6, he weakened d6, and I started to focus on that. So, you know, I've got a slight advantage again through this part, but nothing huge, and black should be okay. Missed my biggest chance for the advantage out of the opening when I didn't take that pawn. So let's go forward a few moves. It's just staying in that range of slight edge to white along this section. Let's see, e4, rook d8, rook e8, a6, e5. So e5, you didn't really like this. I was undecided how to proceed at this point as well. There are a couple different ideas. One is I could just kind of maneuver my pieces around behind the pawns, for example, lifting the rook up, maybe trying to get something lined up on the e-file first before pushing ahead. Or f5. The chess engine also likes f5. It recommends bishop c8. That drops the bishop back so that the rook is defending the d-pawn there, and then queen h6, and it looks like I can try and activate my pieces a little better than what happened in the game. So I still have ideas of the rook coming up and over, either rook, I guess, and just piling up on the king side. So that's kind of interesting. You know, when I was thinking about this f5 move, I was always thinking about in terms of trading. But the chess engine just plays f5 in order to open up a diagonal for the queen. It doesn't want to trade. It just leaves it there, leaves the tension. So that was an idea had not occurred to me. And I think that's pretty interesting. Anyway, I went on with e5 here, and then he took back. I'm still keeping some advantage here if I take with the pawn, but instead I took with the rook. And there's two things wrong with this. One is what black gets to equalize the way he played in the game, but secondly, there's a cool tactic here that black has. So this actually, black has a chance to turn the game around right here. So you're black, say it's your turn, pretend you're black, say it's your turn. What move do you play here? Okay, pause the video if you want some time to think about it. I'm going to give the answer away now. It's kind of a deep tactic, but I think if if you think about it for a while, you should be able to spot it. So yeah, as I said, I'm giving the answer away now. The move is bishop g4. Not the most obvious move, maybe not the first move you thought of, but well, it makes a threat, right? The bishop is threatening to take the rook. And it does another thing too. It opened up the pin here. This knight is pinned by the rook. The knight is pinned against my queen. And then there's a third point. When I take the bishop, he takes back with the knight, which is check. After I move my king, he just grabs the rook. And, well, if I take his knight, it'll be 2 pieces for a rook at first. But then, remember, this is still pinned, so he has the move c5 to win the knight. So I'll just be losing the exchange here. So pretty cool tactics there. And my opponent missed it, and I missed it as well. But you know, a key point of that, it was not just about the pin. It was also about the fact that the king and the rook are in forking distance of each other. They are at a fork's distance apart, with the knight coming to there. So you put the bishop there first with tempo, and then the knight comes in after you take the bishop. And of course, if you just move the rook away, then immediately there's this pin on the knight that black can exploit. So that's why you need to take the bishop. Anyway, he didn't spot that. Let's go. Oh, so in the game he played knight f to e8, and it's about equal. But before that, let's say what I should have played here. I should have played pawn takes. And then this knight really doesn't have a good square. If it comes to h5, I can kick it again with g4. That gets complicated, but I basically win a piece, although I suffer some kingside disruption. Playing g4 is risky because it opens up this diagonal towards my king, but seems to be winning for white with good play. Or if he just avoids the loss of the piece, he retreats, then I can just bring my knight back to f3. You know, I'm always worried about getting an isolated pawn like this, but I can hold on to that pawn, and his pieces, black's pieces, are all pushed back. So, you know, it's pretty bad that all his pieces are on the first 2 ranks, and I have a lot of space. So once again, I can start thinking about, in this position, moving my pieces over towards his king side, and this pawn here is doing a good job of keeping his knight on e8 shut out of the game. So I should be able to get a winning attack going from this point. So that's why I should take with the pawn. Anyway, I took with the rook, so it was just a better move, not least of which because of the tactic. But he played knight f to e8 anyway. That knight was going to run out of squares. You know, I was doing all this to try and set up some pawn pushes over here. And then I moved my queen aside, and it seems to be just about equal here. So you know, I just no longer have that advantage that I had to start with. So let's continue on a little bit. Some normal looking moves. He maneuvered his knight back to oh, that's right. The knight had come from f6. Yeah, he maneuvered the knight around and got it to this f5 square. And now is where I was thinking of trying to arrange some pawn pushes to kick the knight away. Let's see, I played rook d to e8. I'll cancel that. The chess engine, by the way, likes queen to f2 is a better way to hold on to things over here on the king side. See, I went rook d1. He went knight to e6. He could have gone f6. Here's another cool tactic. f6 hitting my rook. Say I drop back, try to hold on to these pawns here. He can sack the knight here. I take, and then he can play bishop to f5 and take advantage of this tactic here. So anyway, there may have been other lines there, but just shows this position is actually pretty complicated in the center, and both of us were making little mistakes through this part of the game, little and big. Yeah, it's just tough if you're not a computer to see everything that's going on. Very, very complicated position. Let's see. Here he went knight to e6. I finally brought my queen over to the king side, queen to f2, and he went rook f to e8. And here I had a really strong move that I missed. Let's see. So that was actually a mistake, rook f e8. He should play bishop to c8, open up a line for his rook. That's best play there. He went rook f e8. That opens up a fork on f6, and I can play the move knight to e4. And that actually is winning. This evaluation shifted crazily here. It's like +4. It's actually a little tricky for him to meet this threat. Let's see, can move the rook back. I can still come in with the check. He can step his king to the side, and I can push on with g4. There are other lines too. For example, if the king had gone to g7, there's a nasty move, queen b2, putting the queen on the same diagonal as the king and threatening some forks with the knight. Anyway, looks pretty ugly all in all. So that knight e4 move would have been a winning move here, and I really didn't think of it. I was still trying to figure out how to push these pawns forward. I didn't want my king to get checked by his queen grabbing on f4, so I played a prophylactic move. I moved my king to the g1 square to get away from some tactics there. But it was a bit slow. And let's see, he goes knight e to g7. Oh yeah, brought this knight here. So I played g4, so I got my pawn pushed in. He played rook takes e5, and I took back with the knight, and that also was a mistake. Once again, I should take with the pawn. It's not a move I thought of. I mean, there's three ways I could take. I could take with the rook or the knight, and I really only thought about two of them, taking with the rook or the knight. But taking with the pawn is strongest because it takes a square away from this knight. After in the game, after I take with the knight, his knight retreats to the d6 square, and everything is more or less okay for black. But after I take the rook with the pawn, his knight is still hanging, and the d6 square is covered, so he doesn't really have a good square for that knight. I see knight h6 is given, then the queen can come here and start making threats against the king side again. So it's all about you know, the awkward placement of pieces on the king side and trying to exploit that. Anyway, I took with the knight. He got a knight d6, and there's a series of small mistakes through this part, but at the end we're all even again. Let's just go ahead to that point. We got a series of exchanges and simplifications. Let's see. Yeah, he takes there, I take, played f5, another exchange, and queen e6, offering the queen trade. So, you know, I could tell it was even at this point. The game had clearly slipped away from me, but I didn't want to give up, so I kept the queens on by playing queen to d2. And there's just kind of a dance that goes on where he periodically offers queen trades, and I'm trying to activate my queen, and nothing big is going on here until he plays knight e4. So this, although it's not a losing move, it's maybe a slight mistake because it gives me some hope. Chess Engine would just kind of sit on this position and play h6. So knight e4 is a slight mistake, although technically this is still drawn. He can't take with the queen because this is a winning endgame, winning king and pawn endgame. That's an important point. After he takes with the queen, I'll trade. He takes with the pawn. I can get to that pawn quicker than he can come around and defend it, and then that looks good for me. So he takes with the pawn now, keeps the queens on, and that's the right approach. Let's see. You know, I had considered playing king f2, and the Chess Engine says I can play that. I mean, the idea would be to get to this square, but he can immediately play queen h4 check and have to step back this way. But this would also be a playable line which keeps some hope alive for white, some winning chances. Let's see. I went queen e3, blockaded with the queen. He went to b5. He went b5. And we're still in the range of, it should be even with the best play. Should be a draw. Until finally he gave this check, and he took my queen. And that is the losing move in the game. He could just keep giving checks. For example, queen c3, king h2, queen c2, king h3. It's actually too dangerous for him to go grabbing a pawn, but he can just keep checking and get a draw by perpetual that way. I suppose if I block, then he can find some other way. But he needs to keep the queen on, and it should be a draw. But after the trade, this is a winning end game here, and I didn't make any more mistakes after this. So the rest of this is fine. I just end up a pawn up. He doesn't quite get there in time to save that pawn. And I managed to push my pawn through, and then just a tempo move over here. And he resigned. He can't, I mean, he can push the pawn, but then my pawn will come through and queen. So eventually he has to move the king out of the way, and then I can step forward and queen the pawn. So anyway, interesting game. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time. Bye.